Hey everybody, Questwise here, and today we're going to talk about some historical stuff. Now, you may have heard me talk about this game before, Blood and Plunder by Firelock Games. Let me get my hand out of the way. This is a miniature, tabletop miniatures game based upon the golden age of piracy in, Jamaica, Bermuda, southern parts of the United States. And it is by far one of my favorite historical games. I don't talk about historical games on this channel as much as I should, and that's mostly because at my age, at this point in my of my sort of hobby career, I just don't have the time nor the willingness to sort of build and put together hundreds of figures for grand historical games. And a lot of historical games they require that type of thing. They require a large amount of figures to be painted and a large play surface, at least a minimum of 4x6. If you're doing 28 millimeter scale, I've been experimenting with things like 6 millimeter scale, 10 millimeter scale, but again, still tons of stuff. Historical games tend to be things like ancients, Romans and Greeks, Peloponnesian War, things like even like grand scale sort of World War II. But Blood and Plunder is a not quite a skirmish game. What's really unique about Blood and Plunder is that you're talking about golden age of piracy. We're talking about nations such as England and Spain and privateers and pirates and the Dutch, East India Trading Company, those types of things. And while this game is much more compact than many other large historical games, it still is a bit of an investment when it comes to starting this game. And that's not a bad thing. What's really interesting about Blood and Plunder is that you have land battles, you have naval battles where you can fight ship to ship, you have amphibious battles where your ships are attacking land or vice versa, land is attacking a docked ship. And there's been plenty of coverage out there on the internet and on YouTube about Blood and Plunder, some great stuff, everything from terrain building, to battle reports, to reviews. But recently announced, Firelock Games is going to be doing a skirmish level version of Blood and Plunder. And to me, that fits my playstyle currently where I'm at in my sort of, like I said, my hobby career. I'm looking for more smaller skirmish type games. And they just announced a game called Port Royal. And I have here some notes on what has been currently released. It's coming to Kickstarter very, very soon. I was told it will be this spring. The exact date has not been set, but as soon as I find out, I will post that for you. But this is a skirmish style game, and it is based on the Blood and Plunder rules, so you'll be able to use your miniatures from Blood and Plunder if you have some. And if you don't, it will take a small investment to getting into this game. Let me talk to you a little bit about what's involved in, or what has so far been released to the public about what Port Royal will be. So it's set in the time period of 1692 during the earthquake in Jamaica in Port Royal. There was a time period when an actual historical event of an earthquake which destroyed most of the city, and it became a haven for pirates and nations like England and Spain and Portugal who were trying to regain or try to at least hold on to their investments in that area. So based on an actual historical time period, but again, because we're playing in a historical game, and we're playing in a more narrative type style, it may deviate a bit from the actual history. It is a skirmish style. Think of things like Frostgrave. Think of games like Mordheim. We're going to have the ability to have a small number of models, which will, during campaign play, will begin to grow during that campaign style. Like I said before, Kickstarter is coming this spring, which is very, very soon. Since the filming of this video, we are now midway through February. From what I understand, this will mostly be Blood and Plunder. Like I said, has 3 different play styles. It has land battles, it has amphibious battles, and it has actual naval battles. From what I understand, the very initial part of this, at least the initial release, will only be land battles. But I expect to see some really, really cool gameplay in that you have a smaller number of models. From what I understand, there will be anywhere between 5 and 15 models total. And you'll be playing on a 2x2 table, a 2-foot by 2-foot table. But it sounds like that might be a little bit flexible. So you might be able to stretch it to a 3x3 or maybe even a 4x4. But with a small number of models like that, you're not going to go much bigger than 4x4, because at that point you then there's too much ground to cover, right? There's just too much time to spend trying to engage your models with each other. Now you probably could do it on a larger table, but from what I understand, the standard game is going to be a 2-foot by 2-foot table with a little bit of leeway in there as well. I was also told that ship combat, smaller scale ship combat, will be coming in an expansion, probably in the first expansion, though there may be, and again, a lot of this is pure speculation. This is all sort of rumor for what I've been told and what I've gathered information and rumors throughout the internet and through people who might be involved. That there may be a free PDF that will hint at some ideas of sort of like an amphibious type of game. So, for instance, a ship attacking a port. So a small number of men on a small ship landing, say possibly during the night and attacking a small village, or vice versa, a ship at port who's being attacked by a small number of enemies. It will use the same models and the unit stats as Blood and Plunder. So if you've already invested in Blood and Plunder and you have some models, I jumped in just before the Blackbeard and Maynard set, which is Beyond the Black. And so I have a bunch of metal models, and I have a couple of resin ships. I got distracted and missed the Kickstarter for the Blackbeard set, so I don't have any of the plastic models yet, nor the ships, though I've heard they are vastly amazing. From what I understand, it will use the same models, so same scale, and it will also use the same unit stat cards, so you'll be able to bring in things if you already own some Blood and Plunder stuff. If you don't, what's really great about it is that you'll be able to buy a small box, maybe just a single box of soldiers or sailors, and be able to jump right into the action from there. There will be an XP system, an experience point system, which will allow you for your characters, your small group of characters, to advance over time through a sort of campaign system. I am super, super in love with narrative games right now. I love games in which that you can play. I did the tournament scene, and I'm done with that. I'm at an age now where I've done the competitive thing, and while it was fun at the time, I want to tell narrative type games, and this will be a way to do this. So think of things like Frostgrave, or think of things like Mordheim, if you're old enough to remember Mordheim. From what I understand, officers and leaders will gain experience points individually, so you'll be able to grow your characters, and then your grunts or your unit type characters will just sort of gain experience as a group, and you'll be able to add skills and be able to upgrade their stats and do some really cool things. There will be one faction for each nation. So if you know Blood and Plunder, there are things like the Dutch and the Portuguese and the Spanish and the French and the English and, the Brethren of the Coast. Each one of those, from what I understand, the major factions will have one single faction for each nation. And if you know Blood and Plunder, each nation has various different factions within that nation group. Except for the English. I understand that the English will have 2 right out of the gate, probably because they were heavily invested in Port Royal when this all happened. There will be 4 different officer options per faction and 4 different crew options faction per nation as well. Like I said before, a 2x2 play area, though that's a little bit, it's recommended, but I feel like that's very flexible. I think that there's a little bit of wiggle room there as well. It's recommended that you have a 2x2 table with plenty of terrain. I don't think that a 2x2 table, a 2 foot by 2 foot play area will be very hard to cover with terrain. But I think if you've played things like Mordheim or Necromunda or even Frostgrave, you'll know that the more terrain, the better, especially in an area like Jamaica at the time in 1600s, where we're talking about things like jungle type foliage and buildings, and now because of the earthquake there'll be ruins and all sorts of stuff. I understand there'll also be dangers, not just via fighting your opponent, but there'll also be natural disaster type of things like broken landscapes and collapsing buildings, possibly even wild animals. I think there's a lot of possibility here. I think there's a lot of flexibility. And outside of just the main rules that will be published, I think there's also going to be a lot of room for house ruling stuff, and just bringing in stuff that you feel is very narratively thematic to the game that you're playing. Like I said before, there's possibly be rules for amphibious and naval play in the future. But that's about all we know at this point. We don't really have an exact date for the Kickstarter, though that will be coming very soon, we've been told. It's going through extensive play testing right now. I understand, I believe if you're going to Adepticon, that there will be demos there, as well as some the ability to sort of add your thoughts to the game of what things that might want to be changed. But I'm very excited. I love Blood and Plunder. I love the golden age of piracy. I think that's a great time period, and a very flexible and one very rich in history in order to play on the tabletop. And I think that Port Royal will bring a new level of narrative gameplay to Blood and Plunder, into that era. If you're interested in sort of smaller scale historical wargaming, I highly encourage you to go check out Firelock Games, Blood and Plunder in particular. But if that's not your gig, they have a sort of Blood and Crowns, which is sort of your medieval War of the Roses type era. It is wonderful. There's a World War I version. I highly encourage it. I'll put a link to Firelock Games website in the notes below, so you can go check out the other stuff as well too. If you're as excited about Blood and Plunder as I am, and I think this game is by far, for its scale, for its time period, bar none, one of the best. Absolutely out there and very, very fair. Now that they've transitioned from more of the resin ships and metal figures into things like plastic, and even some resin figures for some more dynamic, more dynamic type figures, and crisper details. I don't think you can go wrong with that at all. So please stay tuned to this channel, because I'm going to be covering as much as I can about Port Royal in the future. Once we know about the Kickstarter, I'll give you all the details that are available for that, what you can get in the Kickstarter, what you can expect from the Kickstarter as well, and anything going forward. Things like maybe some free PDFs and my journey into the Port Royal landscape, right? So until next time, I'm Questwise, my friends. Please stay safe, and as always, game on.